is no history of the black man settling down with one woman and never desiring to have another. Before slavery, during slavery, or after slavery, the black man has never been recorded to have just one woman.
Right. Well, I think there's some actual facts we can look at on that. Monogamy has failed for the white man in America.
But this is like saying it's okay.
It's not me saying it's okay. This is how they're living. I'm giving you the history of what their life is. Black men haven't been waiting on me to tell them it's all right to have more than one woman. Neither have white men. You know, this is just what they do. I'm not talking about fornication and adultery. I'm not talking about one-night stands and running around rampant with other women. That's not the kinds of, when I say more than one woman relationship. I mean that before we came to America, our men had more than one wife and family. And we were satisfied with it because we had not met the monogamy idea. We had not met the American white woman who, you know, insists on certain kinds of values in her man. We had not learned envy and jealousy. All right, after coming here, those kinds of ideas were bred into us because of society and the mores that the Americans made up here. And so then we started to have problems with that. But I think that since it is apparent that most of them, not all of them, it's certainly up to the man, do love more than one woman. I got tons of mail. A lot of black men write and tell me that they have had two women for 5, 10, 15, and 20 years, and they can't even get the women to speak to each other. Sometimes they have two families.
Would I want to talk to a woman who's sharing perhaps the bed and the money and the social life with who I would deem as my man?
If you want to deal in reality, and if you are not insecure, and if you don't think that that robs you of something, you would want to know them. If he loves her, you certainly should want to know her.
There are a lot of black women out there who say,
I know they're mad about that idea. I understand, you know.
That would never hold water.
Wait a minute, that's not easy. And that's a frightening thought to most of us. And I don't like that. I'm not for that. I'm in agreement with everybody else. Our men ought to just have one woman. But that is not the reality. I'm trying to get us to deal with some reality for a change. Stop dealing with fantasy. Stop dealing with television. Stop dealing with imagination of how we wish things were. Let's deal with them how they are, what it is, present tense. And
but because that's happening doesn't mean I have to like that or want to accept that.
No, that means that you can live in hell. That means you can live in doubt. That means that you can always be checking on your man. That means that you can be insecure and be, tearful. And that means you can be disappointed when you find out the real truth. And you don't want to have that in your life. None of us do. But in order not to have that, then we have to deal with some reality and recognize that men are not limited in the way that women are. Men are able to love more than one woman. I'm not talking about, as I said, just a random sexual relationship of fornication and adultery and all of that. I mean that there are many black men who have children by more than one woman. What is to become of those children? They need their father.
But if you would cheat on me or walk out on me...
Well, see, that's what I'm saying. We have to get into definition. Who told us that was cheating? Where did that idea come from that that's cheating? And I'm not saying that a lot of men are not just running around. I'm not talking about that. But if a woman finds out that her man has been with a woman while she's been with him for 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's a serious commitment in relationship. And if it hasn't taken anything from me, if I'm not going short of anything, and if this is what he thinks his responsibility is, then what kind of hell are you going to go through to prevent that? Since we cannot stop him, we have not been successful. The white woman has not been successful in stopping the white man from having another woman. They call them a mistress. We pick up a lot of that terminology. But a man who has 2 women, that's not necessarily a mistress. That's just his other woman. Now we got 2 choices. We can be the woman or the other woman. We don't have but those 2. Now I know we don't like that. I don't like that. But that's the reality of our life at some point. Now it's up to the man. But every man doesn't want to women, but those that do, they're going to do it.
What about our morals and our religion?
Whose religion? Whose morals? Not our religion, because we're not practicing the religion of black people anymore. That was taken from us. We don't have our morals anymore. That was taken from us. So whose idea are you representing when you stand up for those values? Not ours. Somebody else's. Some other nationality. And it may work for them. But it doesn't work for us. It hasn't worked for anybody, really, but nobody wants to deal with the truth. Monogamy was only created because of the economics of it.
It's the African self, which is the innermost part of our being, that center that we have to learn to trust. And we've been focusing on the church in the sense that it gets you to distrust that part of the self. But spirituality, I want you to understand, is not just a matter of what happens in a religion, in quotes, or in a church. Spirituality also has to do with the phenomenon of education, for instance. The phenomenon of thought, of how we think about things, how we intellectualize about them, how we conceptualize about things. And our children are taught when they enter school, if it's in kindergarten, no matter how young they are taught to assume a concept of reality, a concept of truth, which denies that innermost part of their being, that African spirit. About ourselves, but we got to talk about the European. We got to talk about that conceptualization of the world, which is at the base of European culture. And in that conceptualization, you will get a dichotomized view of reality. That means split. Everything is split in two. First you split it, you see, artificially, because we as Africans believe that everything is a whole. I'm a whole person, I'm not split. But they will split me into reason and emotion. Now after they split me in that way, you see, I'm talking about how we conceptualize about human beings, then what they say is that I am most properly reasonable if I am a human being, which means that the emotion is the bad part, the reason is the good part. In separating that reason from the emotion and then saying that what has to happen is that the reason has to control the emotion, what you're also doing is what I call objectifying a part of you. When you objectify something, you make it into a thing. You make it worthless, really. You make it an it. And in the European concept of knowledge, you've got to objectify things in order to know them. So they objectified nature, this nature that we were talking about as being sacred. They materialize it. They objectify it. They objectify the universe. Now they do the same thing to people. All right? So the African becomes the object. The African also becomes that emotional being that needs to be controlled. So who's the reasonable one? Who's the rational one? The European. So African culture has to be controlled by European culture. Then you get the definitions of what it means to be civilized. To be civilized will mean to be European. Will mean because you're rational, and that means it's okay for you to then civilize the other culture. Civilize the Africans. Well, how do you civilize them? You make them slaves. The whole concept of truth, which is based on this concept of objectification, teaches us not to trust our intuition. The intuition is knowledge that comes from within. Okay? The African self is the self within. So as you're learning this concept, the higher you go in the school system, the more you are put in denial of your African self. The more you are alienated from your African self. Politically, obviously, it creates a problem. Because then when you translate that politically, you also are saying, well, my allegiance is not to to my African people. It's just some kind of universal good or something. Suddenly you become depoliticized. But also it puts you in conflict with yourself, and you can never be whole. In order to be healed, you have to be whole. And as long as you are alienating the core of your being, then you're insane.
unomthi emqondo, umthi wobuthakathi, ubuthakathi bezinto ezithi ngabantu, umthi olinywe yinzondo, inzondo yobumnyama bukamama, umama esithi ngu-Afrika. Unomthi emqondo, umthi wobuthakathi, ubuthakathi obuzelwe yinzondo, inzondo yobugqi besizwe esinsundu, bugqi bona obuvela kuQamata, Qamata yena ongunyana kaThixo kunye noJobela yena oyinkosikazi engumhlaba, umhlaba wona esithi ngumama, mama yena esithi ngu-Afrika. Unomthi emqolo, umthi wobuthakathi, ubuthakathi obuzalwa kungazithembi, ukungazithembi kwesizwe esizondwe lilanga, langa lona elisinika amandla, mandla wona asenza amaqhawe, maqhawe wona azelwe nguJobela, Jobela yena ongumama, mama yena esithi ngu-Afrika. Unomthi emqolo, umthi wobugqwirha, ubugqwirha obuzalwa yinhliziyo ende, yona evela kwabazondwe lilanga, abaneenhliziyo ezibandayo, abavinjwe ubugqi ngenxa yokungafuni kufunda, imfundo evela kubazali, bazali abazelwe ngumama, mama yena esithi ngu-Afrika. Unomthi emqolo, umthi wobuthakathi, ubuthakathi bamehlo aluhlaza, ubugqwirha benwele ezibulembu, unomthi emqolo, inyawo zidumbile, umzimba ubuhlungu, unamatyathanga emaqatheni, unamatyathanga ezihlahleni, ilimi libotshiwe, kuthiwa sisilwanyane, kodwa yena ngumama, umama esithi ngu-Afrika. Unomthi emqolo, umthi wobuthakathi, ubuthakathi bamabhulu, mabhulu wona agajwe lulwandle, lwandle lona eliye lasetshenziswa, lisetyenziselwa ubuqhophololo nobusela, ubusela babantwana, abantwana besibeleko sikamama, mama yena esithi ngu-Afrika. Unomthi emqolo, umthi wobuthakathi, ubuthakathi babelungu, abelungu abangaqhelanga ubuntu, buntu bona ubuyinto yabantu, bantu bona abazalwa ngumama, mama yena esithi ngu-Afrika. Unomthi emqolo, umthi wobuthakathi, ubuthakathi bamasela, amasela esizwe nomhlaba, amasela angenasazela, sazela sona esidalwe phakathi komntu, mntu yena ozelwe ngumama, mama yena esithi ngu-Afrika.
to the evolution of double consciousness, where Africans battle with their instinct to rebel because of the foreign-imposed duty to comply. Right here is a war between actual reality and artificial reality. Pro-life or pro-choice, you are still drafted to serve in the military. Whoever said that African women were never soldiers and still aren't? Had their study of history been limited to the one written by the barbaric invaders of Africa? Of course it would not teach about Kanda Kenzenga and Kanda Kenehanda. How else were they to prevent the present African matriarchs from summoning their inherent warrior spirit? In this battlefield, one consciousness must die for the other to flourish. Gone are the days of researching the permanence of dual realities in the lives of Africans. You either become a member of the artificial nation to fight for gender equality or become a warrior for African liberation. Live to celebrate virtual victories or fight for tangible ones. If you look closely enough, you'll find that this war is between those living with transmitted ideas and those living with organic ones. Well, welcome to the evolution of double consciousness. It seems that this artificial consciousness undergoes a technical glitch when African women participate, but continues to draft them for the purposes of representation. When African women use their digital swords to oppose the ills of society, they later find that modern solutions are not meant to solve historically rooted problems, but only hide them. It's been long since our sisters pledged allegiance to the intersectional struggle, but not too long since they exhibited their sacred bodies for the attainment of freedom. But our naked eyes still struggle to see the victories beyond the corporate opportunities for African women in the lower middle class. My real-time intelligence informs me that there is no other battle the artificial reality can conquer on behalf of the African woman. Because even after bearing the burden of sacrifice, the African reality reflects the rates of femicides to have escalated, while male-to-male murders surpass them. Could the femicide's condition of possibility be the continued existence of the unjustifiable and ever-increasing male-to-male assassinations? Who is willing to train African women and men to kill their enemy? Although selected African women have been elevated from slaving in the factory to sweating blood in the office, there remain no material changes in the African community. The very same community that only lives to sustain itself in the dominating presence of manufactured poverty and inflation. Perhaps the hypothetical progress of artificial troops serving under a virtual consciousness is not applicable to the realities of African women living in distress. Clearly, the artificial nation is not as innovative as it markets itself. Sure, it has recruited an innumerable figure of keyboard warriors showing their rejection of the social order and reporting the increasing number of patriarchal victims. But how come it never prepared its so-called female kings to combat the growing abductions and traffickings of the African children they birthed? How come it never thought to facilitate digital campaigns against such brutality and show their unconditional support for the struggle of the African woman? It seems the artificial nation is unashamed to claim itself as an ally to the African woman, only to later exercise its privilege in choosing which battles to partake in or broadcast. Huh? Are you insinuating that the artificial nation lacks the resources to mission a rescue team for the African sisters who subject themselves to prostitution to feed their families? Could they not be receiving sisterly assistance because in addition to lacking cross-cultural skills, they are unworthy of socio-economic redemption? When the multitude of rape and assault victims reveal themselves, the artificial nation makes its humanitarian contribution by manipulating victims to share their progress stories to the artificial community. They force these victims to affirm that the act is one of taking back their strength. All while the African woman remains devastated to walk from home to the bus stop. Not only is the artificial nation refusing to accommodate and attend to the struggles women face, they also refuse to extend their sisterhood to African communities because they have flagged them as unsafe. While seeking to affirm the agency of all women, this nation continues to infantilize African women because they have neglected their racial mission to serve in the artificial reality. This nation continues to manufacture super sheroes that feature in magazines and news reports, but also works hard to hide that their Afro-mannequins are most likely to become victims to tragedy. Perhaps the artificial reality is only an exile for African women. Perhaps its only use to African women is escape from their own communities. This is a horror story of how freedom of expression turned into the illusion of freedom. The artificial nation has reversed African psychology by capitalizing on the weakness of African women while deceiving them that it is their only strength. Now the power of African matriarchs is slowly being affirmed by non-Africans. Perhaps it is time for a migration, a conscious migration to the actual and racialized reality that Africans already exist in. This reality echoes that there is no survival for those with a double consciousness, because one must die. One must die for the other to flourish.